Well, thank you, Paige, and to our audience, thank you for joining us today. You didn't ask for it, but you're on a journey to the future. And to those of you who are board members or managers, which is the vast majority of who we have with us today, you're tasked with leading your association successfully to the future. And for the homeowners in our audience, we want to equip you to know more about the journey ahead so you can support your board and manager in this journey. Well, every year, every association leader asks the same question: what do I do now to take care of my association? And that's the purpose of today's program, helping you prepare for the journey ahead to make sure you arrive safely and successfully. Here in 2022, your job is indeed challenging. It all started 2 years ago with the upheaval over COVID-19, and last year our industry faced the shock of the tragic collapse of Champlain Tower South. We learned at the cost of 98 lives that deferred maintenance creates or magnifies building safety issues. The consequence of not caring for a building just got a whole lot larger than a special assessment. And with safety issues on our minds, we're now in the middle of high inflation. It's making life tougher for all our clients that had tight budgets to start with. Scarcity creates tension, and that's exactly where we are right now. So a good roadmap and good preparation for the journey ahead is even more important. We've moved from the simple awareness that reserves are good to have, maybe something we'll have someday, to reserves are important to have, understanding their connection to avoiding unfair and unsettling special assessments and related deterioration problems, all the way to reserves are critical to the future of the association. So those major projects get done on time and to minimize costly and now dangerous deterioration to your facilities. So our strategy for today to help you make better and decisions throughout the year, daily and weekly, is to start out with a big picture perspective. We do this to give you the tools so you can execute a successful strategy for your association. This is our roadmap for today's presentation, starting with a little introductory time to brush up your basic reserve funding and spending principles. So, Kevin, start us off with perhaps the most important point we want to share, and that's the purpose of reserve funding.
Hey, thank you, Robert. It's great to be here today. I couldn't agree more that having the right tools and strategy is going to set you up for a successful journey to the future. So let's start at the top. Think for yourself, how do you describe the purpose of reserve funding? For the here and now or for future projects? Think about it just for a minute, because reserve funding is for the present. Reserve funding is not for the future or for a slush fund or for a rainy day. Reserve funding offsets the daily, weekly, monthly deterioration of the common areas of the association. While the expenses themselves are scattered irregularly over the years, reserve funding offsets the ongoing cost of deterioration, which is as real as any other bill the association faces. These funds will be spent in the future, but you prepare for that future expense with daily, weekly, or monthly funding that offsets that day, week, or month's ongoing cost of deterioration. When every owner pays their fair share of what they are enjoying and using up, the future takes care of itself. That's a fundamental concept we need you to understand right here at the start. You're going to have a lot more success with your reserves when you always talk about funding in the present tense, where every owner's responsibility to offset deterioration during the time that they own a home in the association. They're not setting aside funds for the future. And as we go on this journey to the future, we're bound by the 4 reserve rules. Deterioration and the resulting repair and replacement costs are inevitable. Ignoring the cost of deterioration doesn't make it go away. And it's the board who is responsible to protect, maintain, and enhance the common areas of the association. If the board delays a project and deferred maintenance sets in, those same projects will only get more expensive. And then finally, homeowners always get stuck paying the bills, and those delays only end up costing them more money. So remember to keep the board focused and on target. It's their job to protect, maintain, and enhance the common areas of the association and to run the association in a financially sound and sustainable manner. That means no guessing. The goal is to have collected enough funds along the way to perform your reserve projects in a timely manner. Guessing or ignoring the reality of reserve deterioration isn't going to get you successfully to the future. So today, we're going to lay out a roadmap with your key talking points and decision points.
Thanks, Kevin. I want to lay a little groundwork for board decision making. Boards need to know how to safely make those big, important reserve decisions. Now, to minimize board liability risk, if their decisions are ever second guessed, those decisions need to be made based on the three elements of the business judgment rule. Boards are going to enjoy protection from litigation if meeting minutes demonstrate that they acted with a duty of care or good faith, which means making quality decisions, a duty of loyalty, which means putting the interests of the association above their interests as a homeowner, and a duty of inquiry, which means reaching out for information when they don't know the answer. And like Kevin just said, no guessing. And that's where we fit in with a reserve study, recommending a reserve funding plan to offset ongoing deterioration. And that's how we help you answer the question, what do I do now? So, Kevin, what are some good talking points we can share with our audience when asked why an association should get or refer to their reserve study?
All right, sure. So like the list you can see on screen, an updated reserve study identifies future expenses and helps the association avoid surprises. It reduces costs by preparing the association to do their projects on time. It reduces liability boards would have if they were simply guessing. It maximizes property values due to maintaining good curb appeal and keeps the association in compliance with state laws. And then one more thing, there's an intangible benefit of keeping the owners informed, communicating with them so every owner understands where their monthly assessments are actually going. And then on the other hand, the consequences of going without a reserve study is regular surprises, increased expenses, especially in this inflationary environment, which we'll touch on later, and higher board liability exposure. And then also the quote Ds, which are often things like disappointment, how the property looks, discouragement when the association has no money to do what it needs to do, dysfunction, board inaction leading to homeowner discontent, which is another D, deterioration because there's no money or no action, declining home values, poor curb appeal, rumors of a special assessment, distrust is when owners are aware that the board is not taking care of the property, and then danger when deferred maintenance really accumulates.
Well, thanks, Kevin. That's a great refresher of the big picture. Now let's move ahead to talk about the actual application of these roadmap principles. In this section of application, you'll notice we're going to completely skip talking about laws in the 25 or so states that guide reserve studies or reserve disclosures. That's because an association does not need reserve planning because of the law. Associations need reserve planning to prepare for their own future. Do that, and legal compliance follows. So let's talk about boards for a minute. The managers are the agent for the board, but it's the board who actually makes the decisions. But how do managers, those who are with us today, effectively encourage or coax the board towards making those wise choices?
Yeah, that's a good question, Robert. So we all know the theory that boards are responsible to run the association successfully, responsibly, and in a financially sustainable manner. But the reality is that all too often, they act like their job is to keep assessments low. So when boards are pursuing the fool's gold of keeping assessments low, they're acting selfishly and not acting in the best interest of the association like the business judgment rule, duty of loyalty, requires. So it's best to remind boards repeatedly of their job, help them keep their eye on the ball. And then I can also give you a new tool that doing the right thing is actually in their financial best interests. Let me show you how effective reserve planning actually makes money for everyone at the association. In our 2017 study among comparable neighboring associations, what you see on screen is that we found that home prices on a dollar per square foot basis were 12.6% higher in associations with well-funded reserves. That means those that are above 70% funded. This means a strong reserve fund boosts home values. Setting aside enough dollars per month to care for the association maximizes curb appeal and returns thousands of dollars to each owner in maximized home values. It's what we all probably suspected, but now we have the evidence to back that claim. So a roadmap for success starts with a strategy of focusing on a simple message of responsibly budgeting so reserves offset ongoing deterioration. And that's a successful strategy that pays off with maximized home values. So now I'm going to jump right into the next application, the actual reserve study. Words are a powerful tool, and I want to make sure you have the right words to use. And first off, I want to make it clear that what we're about to share are not just association reserves, ideas, or concepts. These concepts are straight from National Reserve Study standards established way back in 1998. First of all, we want to make sure that you understand that there are three types of reserve studies: a full reserve study and two update products, a with site visit update and a no site visit update. So these reserve studies come in these three types. A full reserve study typically only needs to be done once. That means the vast majority of reserve studies performed in the US are the less expensive with site visit and no site visit update. Most with site visit updates are done every third year, as influenced by most state law requirements. The no site visit updates are done in those in-between years. Remember, update studies are much less expensive than that first full reserve study engagement.
Thanks, Kevin. Lots of application there. You actually had me taking notes as you were talking about the issues. Well, now let's get to some actual examples so our audience can make good decisions all throughout the year. And let's start with one of the most common. Is it a reserve expense or an operating expense?
All right. Yeah, good question. So we actually cover that question in an entire webinar in our Reserve Studies 101 program, which you can find on our website or on YouTube. But I'll summarize the answer in the next few slides. So think about it like this. There's a 4-part test that every reserve component must pass: that it's a common area responsibility, that it has a limited useful life, that it has a predictable remaining useful life, and that it is above a minimum threshold cost of significance. Every component in your reserve study needs to pass this 4-part test. But let's get back to the questions you face on a regular basis. And so how do you know if something is a reserve expense or an operating expense? Here's how it works. First, just go ahead and look to see if it's listed in the reserve study. If so, it's a reserve expense.
Hey, Kevin, going to interrupt here. Are you talking about the physical asset itself or project description?
Yeah, right. So if a roof replacement is a line item in the reserve study, cleaning the gutters, for example, on the roof doesn't make it a reserve project. That's just regular, normal maintenance. The reserve component is the actual replacement of the roof, not anything related to just ongoing normal maintenance. Next, let's consider if the expense affects the component's remaining useful life. That means a minor service call to a boiler is not a reserve project, but replacing the igniter system that the boiler's remaining useful life by 5 years, that would be a legitimate reserve expense because it extends the life of that component. And then if it truly looks like if a component was missed or is not knowable at the time of the last reserve study, go ahead and check with your reserve study provider. They will help you decide and prevent you from having to guess. And that's a good example of exercising your duty of inquiry from the business judgment rule. And here's another one. Look at the simple but typical reserve component list. All the normal things are here: description, useful life, remaining useful life, and current cost. So suppose your pool heater fails. You see a pool resurface component, the second project on the list, but no pool heater component. From what you just learned, replacing the pool heater, or pool filter for that matter, isn't automatically a reserve expense just because it's related to the pool. Go ahead and check with your reserve study provider. There may be a valid reason why it was excluded, or they may support the expenditure from the reserves and add it to your component list during the next reserve study update. It's almost always not in your best interest to guess. Too many properties gradually deplete their reserves by spending those limited funds on non-reserve projects.
Great. That helps properties not deplete their reserves. But now can we twist that a little bit? And is there something boards and managers can do to help their properties actually save money on the things that need to get spent?
Yeah, sure. That's always a good idea. So like we just talked about, most of your reserve decisions through the year are going to be spending choices, right? Hopefully the funding plan is already set at the beginning of the year. We want to encourage you to spend reserves on the right projects at the right time. Spending reserves effectively avoids expensive deferred maintenance, but not all reserve projects are the same. There's different reserve components and they're going to just fail differently. Some are okay to defer and some you should really do on schedule. It's okay to defer an inconsequential component when cash may be tight. It's okay to stop, not spend reserves, and let that asset fail. That might be an exercise machine in a gym that nobody uses or a water heater for the pool restroom. It's something that you can live without for a little while. But you want to think twice about reevaluate or obsolescence projects. doing the ones that have true merit for the association, and deferring the not needed now projects. It's the protection and catastrophic projects that you want to make sure to do on time. Those are the projects like wood paint and asphalt seal coating that protect the underlying and very expensive wood or asphalt. Or catastrophic projects like the hot water boiler for the building or the entry gate mechanism. Don't delay those. Those are the ones that will get real expensive or cause hardships if you delay. In this case, green means go and get the project done. But just a reminder, no deferred projects save the association any money. Those projects will still need to be done eventually. And you have to be careful. Defer only the safe projects because otherwise you'll just cost the owners a bunch of money. And then always contact your reserve study provider if you have any questions. Now, this next slide is a classic example of a poor decision. Here, a protection project, a board that delayed doing their protective asphalt seal coat, and as a consequence, the expensive underlying driveway has clearly failed. Replacing the driveway cost them anywhere between 10 and 20 times the cost of the seal project that they deferred. And then the same is true for painting ironwork, as you can see, or even replacing a roof, which you can see on this slide. Delaying protection or catastrophic projects are generally a bad idea unless you've reached out to an expert or vendor and have been given advice that delaying is, in that case, okay.
Kevin, you're doing a great job of keeping everyone on track. Glad that you covered those 5 types of failures. Answer me now, what about when the project matches, but when the cost doesn't match?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to be honest with you, it happens all the time. We're planning for reserve expenses that are going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. It's unlikely that we're going to perfectly estimate what the cost of some of these reserve components are going to be that far down the road. So occasionally, some projects are going to come in over or under what's budgeted in the reserve study. So in this case, first and foremost, just go ahead and do the project. Expect that the extra dollars will either come from other reserve projects or can be redistributed to other projects. The asterisk on that second point there is to let you know that all this happens automatically when using the cash flow method. And then make sure your reserve study is updated with this new information, making your reserve study better every time, over time. So don't spend a lot of time worrying about it. Go ahead and spend reserves, get the project done, and protect the property. Taking care of the property is more important than following your reserve study document. And do what needs to be done, and remember the 4 reserve rules. Delayed projects often get expensive, and that just makes things more expensive for homeowners.
Okay, we talked about cost not matching. What about the replacement itself? Is it ever okay to upgrade a component, making it better or different when it gets replaced? Does that, by definition, make it a capital improvement?
Yeah, great question. So by definition, reserves are not for adding new assets to the association like a new dock or a new tennis court where one previously did not exist. That's the key. But if the asset needs to be replaced, it's totally fine to do a natural upgrade, like you see on the slide, replacing, an older light bulb with another type of light that uses less electricity. So remember, if the asset or project exists already is the key distinction. Remember that reserves offset ongoing deterioration of existing assets. Reserves are not a slush fund to be used to buy new things for the association. If your boards ever have a question on this issue, just feel free to reach out to your reserve study provider for clarification, and they'll be happy to help.
Kevin, you keep saying the same thing, that when you have a question, reach out to your reserve study provider. And I think that's tremendous advice from someone who's busy, because we're in the business of helping our clients make those good decisions throughout the year. Okay, well, let's turn the topic to money. And the big question is if the association has enough. Now, this is another topic that, like with components, we devote an entire webinar to this issue, Reserve Studies 102, which again, you can find on our website or YouTube.
Yeah, that's great. And the major point from that webinar is to measure reserve fund size by percent funded, not necessarily the actual cash balance. Champlain Towers South had about $700,000 in its reserve fund. Now, at first glance, that might sound like a lot until you understand that they had so many reserve projects waiting to be done that they were only about 7% funded. Percent funded tells how well the reserve fund meets the needs of the association at that time. And remember that the cost of deterioration is ongoing. Percent funded reveals the result of that funding, if the resulting reserve balance has kept pace with the ongoing deterioration over the years. It's kind of like the world record pace line that you sometimes see in a swim race. It allows you to know how we're doing in comparison. Now, this next chart shows you why percent funded really matters. The chart shows that you can predict most special assessments. You can see them coming years in advance when you look at percent funded. Special assessments are common when the association is in the 0 to 30% funded red zone on the left, but special assessments are infrequent in most of the yellow zone and rare in the green zone. Pretty powerful information, and it's great information for board members to know. So once again, please go ahead and give me a hands raised if you see how percent funded tells you if your association is prepared or unprepared for your upcoming expense. And thanks again in advance for your ongoing participation.
I think what our audience is now thinking, wow, I know how to minimize our special assessment risk. I know how to see how we're doing, but what's it take to adequately fund reserves, offsetting that ongoing deterioration that you're talking about? And on this slide, it shows that typical number is often about 25% of total budget. And you can see that real clearly on this little pie chart, a good visual image for you to remember. Typical reserve funding takes about 25% of an association's total budget.
And another good question after that is why budgeted contributions instead of just special assessing when major projects come up? So with budgeted contributions, every owner pays their fair share of steady, ongoing deterioration over the time they own the home in the association. The result is that the funds exist when they are needed. Having the funds on hand eliminates costly deferred maintenance. And remember, the future takes care of itself when you take care of proper contributions on an ongoing basis, everyone paying just their fair share. This is the magic of how associations avoid unfair special assessments and expensive deferred maintenance and maximize their property values. This is all part of your roadmap to success. Choosing your words and discussion points carefully is how curb appeal and property values are maximized. That's a successful strategy. All right, so some of you are probably distracted thinking your association isn't close to putting 25% of the total budget aside and wondering if that's even possible. But I'll tell you that reserve funding really is not too expensive. Even 25% of the total budget often works out to about the cost of a premium cup of coffee per day per owner. That's pretty affordable if you ask me. And if somebody says they can't afford it, then I think they're just plain wrong. And besides, another fact is that budgeted reserve funding is the least expensive way to pay for a reserve expense. The expenses are what they are. The only choice you have is how the owners will pay. With budgeted funding for a $250,000 roof project, owners will pay less than $250,000 due to compound interest earned from the bank. A special assessment will pay for the expense. $250,000 special assessment should cover a $250,000 roof. But at current rates, it will take about $320,000 from the owners to pay back a $250,000 loan. And like we said plenty of times before in this webinar, delaying usually gets expensive.
Right. So budgeted contributions are going to cost the owners either less than a special assessment or a loan. I get that. That makes sense. But can you offer some help for boards or managers who still have that 25% number stuck in their head and they're thinking, wow, we need to significantly increase our reserve funding? How do they get started on that path to success?
Yeah, so the general idea is to start raising your reserve contribution a little bit at a time as frequently as possible. And we call it the $10 solution. It likely took these association years or even decades to get into an underfunded jam. So check with your reserve study provider. You usually can take a few years to get out of that jam. Consider raising your reserve funding by $10 per month per owner this year, and then another $10 per month per owner the following year. And just about 2 to 5 years, that's usually all it takes for most associations to raise their reserve funding to a sustainable level.
Right, a little bit at a time. It seems like so much of what we're talking about today is a little bit at a time, making those incremental changes, those incremental improvements, step by step, moving in the right direction. Okay, well, we're at the summary time for our program today, still answering the question, what's the right thing to do? And how can you have reserve fund success at your association? So, Kevin, bring it into a close here with some summary advice.
All right. So at budget time of year, first of all, know what to look for in your reserve study. Know the year that the reserve study was prepared for because it quickly gets out of date. Also, you want to know the type of reserve study, whether it was a full with site visit update or no site visit update. And then look for the 3 things in that reserve study. The component list to see your reserve projects, Number 2 is the evaluation of reserve fund strength, which is measured by percent funded. And number 3 is the multi-year funding plan. And then after you receive the reserve study, what are you going to distribute to the owners? Well, we recommend distributing the executive summary to all owners and then leaving the completed reserve study for those that specifically request it. And you can either send them a digital copy or a link so that they can read it or print it themselves. And then, so what does success really look like? I would measure success by a lack of disruptive special assessments, projects getting done on time, percent funded above 70%, reserves being spent only on true reserve projects, and the ability to pay your operating fund projects from the operating fund.
Yeah, paying them from, keep your cotton picking hands out of the reserve fund.
And then I have one more pro tip about updating. Most associations that we work with come back to us for a with-site visit update about every 3 years. And because reserve study information is in a constant state of change, we find that special assessments drop about 30% in the associations where they do no site visit updates in those in-between years between the site visits. Those boards are keeping their eye on the ball, demonstrating their duty of inquiry and duty of care, getting the information they need to make quality decisions to care for their property.
Thanks, Kevin. I just want to step in here and add one more thing before we leave today. If you thought the information we shared was helpful, you can get our book, Understanding Reserves. Read chapter 1 for free on our website, and I'll put a link to that in our webinar outline. And of course, you can order the book itself right straight from Amazon. It's all part of our goal that you have a good grasp on the physical and financial condition of your property so you can move forward safely and successfully on your association's journey to the future. And that brings us to the end of our planned content today. Scroll to the bottom of our home page if you want to sign up to be notified of upcoming programs like this one, or you can click a link at the top of our home page to request a proposal for your association to get us on your team. To get today's outline, fill out a short survey at the end of our program, at the end of our Q&A time. Make sure to tell us what you'd like to see in future programs. Our next webinar is a client-inspired webinar where we'll be showing actual client case studies. So at this point in time, I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, who will serve as our MC for our Q&A time together.